Resident Evil 4 is one of the most influential video games in the history of the medium. A game that perfectly balances tense third-person gunplay, varied set pieces, and impeccable pacing to deliver something truly unique at the time of release. It was, and still is, a crowning achievement for the series and creator Shinji Mikami. Of course, the series continued in its wake, but most would argue that the sequels failed to live up to the flawless execution of the fourth numbered entry. Then things changed with Resident Evil 7, and Capcom began to embrace an alternating release schedule split between first-person entries with their own unique style and ambitious new remakes. Resident Evil 7 and Village both managed to revitalize the series, while 2019's Resident Evil 2 Remake cemented itself as not only one of the best entries, but one of the greatest remakes of all time. So it was with equal parts anticipation and apprehension that Capcom announced it would be remaking Resident Evil 4. Could they really do it justice? After all, as impressive as their most recent efforts had been, recreating a legendary game like Resident Evil 4 is a far more daunting task. Now that it's here, it's immediately clear that we're looking at a complete reimagining of that original game using its in-house RE engine. It, perhaps predictably, fails to revolutionize the genre, but the way the game has been updated for a new audience is still remarkably engaging and a fantastic recreation of that original experience. It's darker, scarier, and features completely redesigned environments. More predictably, the team has crafted a visually beautiful game using that in-house RE engine, technology which has continuously impressed us since its inception. Alas, the final game suffers from some minor technical hiccups that kind of surprised us all. So for today's video, I want to accomplish a few things. Firstly, since this video is going live on launch day, I'd like to share the current status of the primary console versions of the game. We've already covered the demo and highlighted its issues, but now we can offer our thoughts on the final game as of launch day, including advice on how each version performs. Then I'd like to discuss this new version in comparison to the original Resident Evil 4, both from a visual and gameplay perspective. Capcom opted not just to recreate that original experience, but has instead opted to expand it. Of course, there may be some slight spoilers here, but I'll refrain from giving too much away. So, without further ado, let's dive in. With the release of Resident Evil 7, Capcom introduced the world to the RE engine, which has gone on to power a wide range of games, including this new iteration of Resident Evil 4. Having shipped so many RE engine titles across current and last generation machines, you kind of expect a certain level of polish, especially in the wake of the sublime Resident Evil Village. To an extent, that polish is evident, but it has also launched with a handful of issues which do detract slightly from the otherwise gorgeous presentation. So in our original video covering the demo, we noted several key issues. Firstly, the PlayStation 5 version using checkerboard rendering appears to exhibit issues, producing results that are less sharp than the raw numbers would suggest, especially when using the horrendous chromatic aberration and lens distortion features. Ray tracing features were also broken on PS5, with missing reflections. Furthermore, all versions exhibit unstable performance which varies based on your selected options. We also noted issues with the lighting when utilizing the game's strand hair feature. Then lastly, the Xbox version suffers from unresponsive controls with a huge dead zone and a poorly configured acceleration curve. As of the editing of this video just before launch, I can report that only one of these issues has been corrected for the release, the ray tracing on PS5. It now behaves like the Xbox version and looks pretty good. Reflections are still somewhat low resolution and grainy, but in areas with lots of water or other reflective surfaces, it definitely contributes to a more cohesive overall image. All other issues remain, however. The image quality is still somewhat subpar on the PlayStation 5. The pixel count in resolution mode is 2160p, while performance mode can deliver roughly 1944p on both Xbox Series X and PS5, but the perceptible result you get on Sony's machine seems much lower in practice. I believe this is due to a problem with the implementation of the checkerboard rendering on PS5. The poor resolve leads to aliasing and shimmering issues throughout, especially on thin objects such as foliage. This really needs improvement, I think. The sluggish controls on the Xbox version also remain the same, however, leading to a less enjoyable experience as aiming becomes frustrating and laggy. The combination of an overly large dead zone and an incorrectly configured acceleration curve seem to be at fault. The problem should also be fixable if Capcom takes note. Then there's the hair strand system, which still exhibits incorrect lighting on consoles. So even though the extra detail is certainly appreciated, it's spoiled by the fact that it's lit improperly. When taking into account the performance impact from enabling this feature, we still recommend disabling it. Now, of course, we'll have a second video going live shortly after this one, going into more detail regarding the platform comparisons, but for day one buyers, I wanted to ensure that you had the right information. Basically, right at this moment, the PS5 version offers a slightly higher average frame rate with more responsive controls, but a reduction to image quality. Xbox, on the other hand, offers a cleaner image with a much wider VRR window, which allows you to enjoy more demanding settings, but feels much less responsive to play. We'll also get into the other versions, including Series S and both PlayStation 4 consoles. Now, once you've settled on a platform, one thing is for sure, no matter which version you're playing, the visual quality is excellent, though perhaps not as stunning as that original GameCube release was for 2005. You see, at the time, we had seen most of what the current generation of consoles had to offer, but GameCube's poor market performance ultimately resulted in few games that could truly take advantage of the hardware's potential. And then came Resident Evil 4. Part of the Capcom 5, the fourth numbered entry in the series had been years in the making and was designed to take full advantage of the GameCube's hardware. Large, detailed environments were paired with impressively sculpted character models, superb lighting, beautiful animation work, and tons of special effects taking full advantage of the GameCube's Texture Environment Unit, or TEV. Playing it today, there's still something special about that original presentation on the GameCube. But of course, technology has continued to evolve since its release, and nearly 20 years later, expectations have increased significantly. So how does the remake fare? Well, overall, I'd say Capcom's artists have done a fantastic job of capturing the look, feel, and atmosphere of that original game on new platforms. The character models continue to be a hallmark of Capcom's recent work, with an absurd level of granular detail on display. From realistic skin shading and richly textured hair to the gorgeous shell texture fur adorning Leon's coat and beyond, it's all super impressive. Just check out the sheer amount of detail in Leon's coat. The leather material already looks great, it's worn and realistic, but even his zipper is fully detailed and modeled out. Same goes for his trusty firearm for that matter, not to mention his shoes. Thanks to the game's photo mode, you can zoom in as close as you want on just about everything. There are expected changes, of course, but the evolution of the environments is perhaps more interesting. You see, prior remakes in the series were based on games that utilized pre-rendered backgrounds. Resident Evil 4, however, was always a fully 3D game, thus the team needed to find a balance between creating familiar scenes and building something entirely new. I'd say they succeeded. The environment still managed to channel the original experience, but the actual level layouts and world structure have changed significantly. Essentially, Resident Evil 4 is now a seamless hub-based game. The initial village area, for instance, including the lake, can now be fully explored on foot or by boat without any loading screens. The entire area has been expanded and refined. It still feels true to the original vision, of course, but introduces so many new areas to explore. To demonstrate this in action then, let's take a quick look at the first few chapters of the game, starting right here after the opening cutscene. Here we can compare both the visuals and overall layouts. The initial sequence leading up to your first encounter serves as a statement of intent for the remake, an opportunity to rethink and expand the game world. You see, in the original, the house is immediately visible from your starting point, whereas in the remake, you'll need to walk down this path before eventually stumbling upon the house. This initial sequence has basically been quadrupled in terms of length. Whether that's good or bad is up for debate, I suppose, but I think it works and establishes the atmosphere. Now, the house itself is noticeably larger and arguably more realistic in the remake. I mean, consider the original layout here. It basically consists of a single L-shaped hallway at the front of the house, a dining room, and a small corridor with some steps, and that's it. There's no place to sleep or really do anything else. The remake, however, features a slightly larger but more logical layout. You still have that front-facing hallway, but now it features a bedroom, a proper dining area, a basement, and an actual room upstairs. And all of it is enhanced by the indirect lighting capabilities of the RE engine, which definitely helps set the mood with more realistic, natural lighting throughout the home. While we're here though, playing this again, did you ever stop and think about this initial cutscene? Like, Leon didn't know this was an infected enemy, right? Yet he walks into this Spanish stranger's house and begins asking questions in English. And what's up with this awkward photo of Ashley anyways? It's neither good nor bad, it's just funny to think about. So another interesting thing that caught my eye is the escape from the house. In the original, you basically dive out of the second story window and you're back outside in the front yard. In the remake, however, you're dropped off in the backyard with only one path forward. From this point leading up to the initial village encounter, the level design has been completely changed here. But I do think the artists did a fantastic job of capturing the general atmosphere, while perhaps ratcheting up the tension just a bit. As you make your way to the aforementioned village then, the time of day slowly begins to align, and the remake does an excellent job of capturing the original game's atmosphere and color. The brownish hues of the withering trees and foliage are suitably spooky, and I was impressed with how elegantly the team has managed to channel the feel of this opening area while greatly enhancing the overall level of detail. But okay, this battle here is critical. It basically serves as our first test of the remake's new mechanics against the original. Getting this right is paramount and goes to the heart of what made the original game so important back in 2005. You see, at its core, the mechanics might initially feel similar to any classic RE game. Leon basically controls like a tank, planting his feet while aiming and restricting movement. However, the move to a full 3D world allowed the designers to introduce new gameplay possibilities and full 3-dimensional aiming. Resident Evil 4 in its original form is delightfully interactive. You can climb over any fence, smash through almost any window, climb or knock down ladders, walk around inside and on top of most buildings, and dispatch your enemies with a wide variety of weapons and tactics. There was simply no other third-person shooter on the market that offered this level of freedom to the player, and the opening village with its barrage of enemies is a perfect demonstration of this. And crucially, the remake does get it right. All the same options are still available to the player, but they are slightly expanded. For example, you can now move and shoot. A touchy subject given how critical not moving and shooting is to the pacing of the original game, but the balance has been shifted to support this, making enemies even more aggressive. You'll quickly find yourself jumping in and out of structures, kicking over ladders, and taking out enemies. This beautifully lit environment is now packed with so much more detail, adding to the immersion, and it really showcases the capabilities of the RE engine. You also have access to some new tricks. Leon can now crouch, for instance, allowing you to sneak up behind unsuspecting foes and take them out quietly. It's basically another tool in the combat toolbox. Oh, and you can now switch weapons on the fly using the D-pad. Now, the original game still holds up brilliantly, mind you, but weapon switching is one of those archaic mechanics that I'm glad has been removed. You see, in the original, you need to bring up the inventory menu anytime you want to change equipment. The remake, however, allows you to assign them to D-pad directions, enabling instant switching. This allows you to more seamlessly juggle things like stun grenades and different weapons without pausing the action, and it is a huge improvement. The only criticism I would make, and this is something that has been bothering me for a while, is the lack of an aiming sight. The switch to a reticle-based aiming system from the integrated dot sight of the original RE4 remains disappointing to me. It just never looks as good in action, and I would love to have a physicalized red beam slicing across the environment. Please, Capcom, bring this feature back. So these opening sections offer what I feel is a strong evolution on the original design. The combat is just as engaging with full stagger mechanics and context-sensitive melee, and the level design is even stronger. It's a promising start. From this point, the game begins to diverge once again. Your objective is the same, but how you reach your objective has changed. Some areas are shared, while others are completely new. For instance, in the original game, after you and Luis manage to escape capture, you basically walk outdoors and meet the merchant for the first time. It's very quick and simple. In the remake, however, this sequence is extended. Your gear has been taken away, so you need to fight your way through a small shack in order to retrieve it, which results in some light puzzle solving and mild melee-based combat. The shopkeeper then shows up, unlocks the door, and you're able to meet with him for the first time. It's a minor shift in the pacing, but it's the type of thing you'll see repeated throughout this game. The next section, however, I want to discuss is the Valley. This is one of the more impressive environments in the original game, with hanging walkways randomly attached to the surrounding walls. The remake version of this area is completely different from a layout perspective, but as you can see, it captures the look and feel perfectly. The level of detail is breathtaking and completely transforms the presentation. The little flags blowing violently in the wind, the particles filling the air, and the creaking, rusted shanty roofs all contribute to a cohesive presentation. This whole section also plays out rather differently. Your objective is still to unlock a door by finding two pieces of a crest, but the location and layout of this area is completely different, and the locked door is placed in a different area as well. It's just another example of how the original design serves as inspiration, but doesn't directly define what you do in the new game. Now, if we jump forward a bit in time, we begin to see more significant changes in terms of visual design. For instance, here the time of day has changed to the point where the sun now hangs low in the sky, lending the game a completely different vibe. I really like the mood in the original game here, but there's no denying that the scene in the remake is extremely detailed. Gnarled trees jut out from the side, ruined gravestones litter the path ahead, while a craggy fence encircles this unholy place. They've also expanded this upper area near the church with additional mountainous terrain, which again sort of changes the atmosphere, don't you think? When you return to the same area at night though, after the El Gigante fight, I do think it's missing a certain something in the remake. The dark, foreboding original with the flashes of lightning really sells the mood. It just feels a little less threatening here on the return. The church itself, on the other hand, is very faithfully recreated, but with dramatically increased geometric and texture detail throughout. The next shot, though, demonstrates the power of modern lighting. The shopkeeper's collection, which is perfectly lit by a single bulb, feels extremely faithful to the GameCube original, but greatly enhanced. And then next to the shopkeeper, we get a chance to see the game's water in action. This is with ray-traced reflections enabled, and I think it shows how water effects have evolved since the mid-2000s, when the GameCube relied on a warbling mesh with a TEV-powered surface texture. For comparison, this is how this area looks without ray tracing enabled. There are some quirks with the way SSR works in this game, which Oliver will touch on in his video, by the way. But I do want to highlight this issue with the reflections. So we're looking at the Xbox Series version here, and it's the same on PS5, but note how distant reflections often pop into view like this. This suggests a limitation in how far the BVH structure draws out. Not a big deal in most instances, but something to note. But okay, let's do one last comparison, shall we? The El Gigante fight. This is one of the coolest early battles in Resident Evil 4, and they've done a fantastic job of improving the presentation during this sequence. One of the highlights is this. In the original, El Gigante can destroy these little wooden huts, which is a very cool touch for 2005, right? Well, in the remake, they've kicked it up a notch with some custom animation work where he literally tears the structure from its base right before your eyes. It looks awesome. But okay, I don't want to spoil much more here, and this is really just scratching the surface. There's so much more to it, but I think it demonstrates the approach to visual and level design Capcom has taken with this new version of the game. Of course, if you still want to enjoy the original game today, the HD version available for modern platforms is a great choice. I've noticed some folks still had the impression that this version was based on the PS2 port, which itself was a major downgrade from GameCube, but that's not the case. It is indeed a conversion of the GameCube original, with a few minor caveats here and there. However, when increasing the resolution of the game, it also clearly reveals limitations of those original designs, which is why also checking out the Resident Evil 4 HD project for the PC, which is a stunning achievement that goes over the entire original game with a fine-toothed comb. Regardless of how you play, however, Resident Evil 4 is still a legendary experience, both in its original incarnation and in its remake. Yet, judging this remake has proven rather difficult. I do think Capcom has done just about everything they could to recreate the game, but there's really no way it could have ever had the same impact as the original, right? The remake basically brings it up to modern standards in terms of play mechanics, but it doesn't exactly redefine the genre either. I'm not even sure it really needed to. What's most important is that it does not sully its legacy. This is a very good remake and a huge step up over the somewhat disappointing Resident Evil 3 remake. The fact that this is still a cross-generation game yet exhibits noticeable performance hiccups across all consoles is certainly disappointing. This should not be happening, and it feels less optimized than other recent Capcom games. Despite this, it's still very much worth playing. I just hope Capcom can patch the last remaining issues. But that's going to do it for this video, so hopefully you enjoyed it. If so, be sure to let us know, and we'll see you next time.